Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the Sommelier Series, where Nagarro invites industry leaders to have a conversation about the things they care about in technology. My name is Bill Kayser, and today I'm here with Ward Cunningham to talk about the ways we're shaping the future of technology. And Ward, when I think about shaping the future of technology, I think about how your ideas and inventions have shaped my present in technology. I was looking over kind of the list of your inventions and contributions, and including being one of the co-authors of the Agile Manifesto, pioneer in design patterns, one of the original inventors of that idea, inventor of the term technical debt, framework for integration testing.
To be clear, I did not invent your technical debt.
Oh, thank you. That's good to know. That clears up a lot of confusion I've had over the years. No, but I found that out recently. And it's just like one of these little sort of side facts that you learn about Ward that's not even kind of at the top of your list, but an example of just like one of the most influential ideas in software engineering, something that's influenced me tremendously through my whole career, along with, design patterns. I mean, that was a huge inflection point in my career as a programmer, and all of these other things. Amazing contributions. And you don't really rest on your laurels, do you? You go move on from one idea to another.
Well, I'm feeling pretty good right now. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you joining us. And I've always looked forward to my conversations with you and to have a big audience to participate in this. We'll be taking questions probably in about 45 minutes from people, submitting them on LinkedIn. And in the meantime, looking forward to having a conversation with you.
Well, I am too. And Bill and I have crossed paths multiple times in our careers, and try to keep in touch. And if this is what we have to do, well, we'll do it. and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to a large audience. I do enjoy that, and to do it in this context of a repeating event where I get to kind of just get a little more cred by association. I'm always always up for that. Bill and I have actually had a lot of mutual respect, and I've always made it a point to kind of hang around with people who are doing things that I wish I could do and don't feel I can. And after a while, I figure out that I can, maybe not as well as they do, but it's always sort of broadening. And I've done that my whole life, out of curiosity more than anything.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things worth pointing out is that the conversation you and I are having right now, even though it's being broadcast, is very typical of kind of the way you interact with people and we meet. You just you like meeting people in person, or virtually, but one-on-one.
As best we can, yes.
Yeah. And these conversations are always very enlightening. So I want to go back to your inventions. You've got this list of things you're constantly, you're not staying with one technology or one idea and sort of milking it. You move on quickly. And I always wondered sort of how you kind of pick the next thing that captures your interest, the next thing you're going to work on.
Yeah, that's, like I say, I get a lot of benefit. I think I was the younger of two boys, and my older brother was always 2 years ahead of me, no matter how fast I tried to grow. And I just got used to, looking to others for hints of what I might like to do. And so one of my favorite questions to ask is somebody will be telling me something, and I just look at him, I say, how did you ever get a job like that? and then sort of saying, yes, I admire you, but tell me a little bit about you and where your ideas come from. And people always tell me amazing things. It's a simple question, and they might have worked a lot harder than I care to work. But sometimes there's something that says, gosh, I almost did that. I ought to just do more of that. And it's kind of like I have a personal to-do list that someday I'd like to learn how to do 3D graphics better. Well, I'll chip away at it for a while, and then I'll say, boy, there's a lot to learn here. I'd better be a little more specific of what I'd like to do. But then, some project will come by and I say, gosh, I wonder if I could do that in a weekend. And I can, so most of my knowledge, I think, comes from just trying to do things in moderate success. So I get a lot of mileage out of moderate success. And I think that is something that we all have to do. And a lot of the things that you named off were things that, after some moderate success, I said, boy, this is something that I pick up these little things, and if I called them patterns, I have this catalog of patterns in the back of my head. Maybe that's something we ought to write down. And shared that story with a handful of people, and we said, well, let's get our bunch of smart people and just write some patterns. And then when that didn't work, we said, oh, well, we have to cast a bigger net. And it was, but the belief that there's a lot of little things that you pick up along the way. I have to tell a story. When I got on this morning, I turned on and it said my internet. I'd lost internet connection. I thought, well, that's going to make Bill can talk to himself, I guess. And so I looked at and I said, oh, the internet said no Wi-Fi. So I turned the Wi-Fi off and turned on again, and it worked. And we were just chatting. Oh, yeah, that's something you learn pretty quickly. Any technology's busted, you turn it off and turn it on again.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you might ask, why does that work? Well, whatever's going on in the computer, it does extra stuff when it turns on. So if you turn it off and turn it on, it'll do whatever extra stuff it needs to get going again. And it's not completely stupid, the idea that you fix things by turning it off and turning it on again. And I'm here today because of it.
Yeah, well, we're grateful for that. You're expert in technological troubleshooting.
Whacking it on the side also works. That worked especially well for old televisions, because the number one thing that we had a big click, click, click switch that switched about 25 contacts, and they always got old and the contacts would not make good contacts. So you whack your TV on the side and it jiggles it enough that it starts working again.
I remember I had a class in college with it was like semiconductor class, and the professor was a guy named Aldo DeRosa, and I'll never forget going into his office hours one time, and he was using one of those old Macs, with the original
Mac, little tiny Mac.
Yeah, and he was doing all of his work on there, and we go in there, and he's talking to us, and he's referring to his notes on the computer, and all of a sudden the screen blinks off, and he stops for a minute. He kind of turns to us and he says, well, it's good that I'm an expert in technology and electronics because I know exactly how to fix this. And he whacked it on the side and it came back on.
And it came back on. Yeah. Yeah.
So you get come around these ideas. You're around this, people who are constantly, discussing big ideas with you, and then you're sort of trying things, maybe a weekend project. Then do you at some point decide you're going to go deep into something now, or do you still kind of stay in the breadth of things? I find I just get overwhelmed, by if I start looking at something. You pull back the covers and you realize it's so deep. There's so much more to it that it's quite daunting. How do you overcome that?
Oh, you have to enjoy being daunted. I think is one of the keys. That there's some new, especially with the web, there's so much written about things, and how much can I read? And everything you read, it says, oh, this is getting more and more complicated. And I think that there's well, I don't know what everybody does. What I do is instead of reading everything, part of it is, I guess I'm a slow reader. So I'd rather just, oh, here's a little thing. I wonder if I could write a program that just did that. And if I write a program that just does that and it doesn't work very well, I say, oh, I need to figure out how to do a P and a Q and an R because this X and Y wasn't enough. And then when I'm reading, it'll say, oh, well, you're going to have to do this Q. And then there's got to be a P over here. And all of a sudden things start clicking into place. And what it does is it ties this abstract conversation about what somebody else has done and ties it to something I've done. And if I say, so I could go back to my program and put that in right now. And then I look at it and say, well, maybe this isn't the best start. I'll just brush that aside and take another start, or maybe I will build it in. But the act of constructing, means that your control of the pace of what you're learning by what you decide to do next is very strong. There's also, if you do it on Saturday, then there's no apology necessary if you throw it all away and say, oh, I guess I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And because there's so many things, there are so many things you can do. And this is the pervasiveness of computing now. And that you should try a lot of things. And if you get the whiff of opportunity, you say, well, I could benefit from learning more about this, then you do it. And I think the surprising thing is all this stuff that you read that seems so complicated, after a couple of weekends, and maybe pigeonholing a few people, who know how to do it even better, you've gotten up to helpless rank amateur to, I could complete a project. Do I want to complete a project? Would I want anybody depending upon me completing a project? Maybe not yet, but it does not take long to get past that initial fright, really. Oh,
do you see projects with like a timeline where you kind of look back at some of the things you've worked on, and do you see sort of like a lifetime of a project, like typically work on something 2-3 years or 5 years, or is everything kind of open-ended?
I think it's both ways, I like to say I've had one foot in the open world where you're, quote, scratching your own itch, and another foot in professional development where people are dependent upon you getting done. And so when people are depending upon you getting done, what flexibility you have is, kind of what done means, so you very quickly want to get enough done that somebody could say, yes, you're doing the right sort of thing now, this and this and this. And then, well, if they ask for this and this and this, 3 more things, and that, well, if you get 2 of them done and the deadline comes, well, you're not in a terrible case. This flexibility of always an opportunity to go back and do more, but at some point, somebody's going to build on what you built. Somebody's going to sell it or something like that, and you really have to be able to work backwards from that. And that is when lots of real project experience pays off. And the best way to get good at that is to work on projects, especially to tag along, and especially when, well, we thought this was going to work and it's not working very well. Do we want to keep doing this, or do we want to look for a little bit of a right turn? And how do people think about that? And how do the people who are depending upon them think about that? And sometimes it'll surprise you because it isn't what you thought.
Yeah.
I remember working on one project where the customer, and this is one where we had one customer, and they said, well, we need this and this and this and this. And we gave them a date, and they said, that'll be great. We're working towards that date. And we figured out, can't make that date. And so we had a whole company meeting of who screwed up, this, that, and the other. We not make the date. And we said, well, we did all these things. And then it finally came down. All right, I have to call the customer and tell them we can't make the date. And we all shuffled out of the meeting room and came back and called the customer and says, oh, no problem. We don't need that for another 2 months anyway. I said, boy, we sure went through a lot of self-examination, but you know, the pressure was created, was our own pressure. Now, I'm not saying that's the easy out, but I'm just saying that was kind of surprising. And I always felt that as you're doing things, you should know what you've done and why you've done it. And when you find yourself in a meeting like that, you need to be able to represent to other people that don't quite understand what you're doing and why, what you did and why. And it's sort of a, well, here's where we got to with the best advice we had when we started. And it just, computers are quirky. I'm not saying that that's the way you want things to work, but I'll tell you, I learned something that day that people who make promises don't like to have to call their customers and say they're not going to be met. And customers know that computers are weird too. So if you got a space shuttle launch going, that's when it's pretty hairy.
Yeah. But you seem to kind of live in this world where you've got kind of two worlds at any given time. You've got sort of your, working in whatever organization where you're trying to deliver something and meet deadlines and make commitments, and then you've got kind of your home world where you're working on an invention and things are much more open-ended and you're more in control, and you balance those two. I mean, is that pretty much how
I think I've done that, and I'm not sure when that started.
Yeah.
I think it might have started in earnest when I finally took open source seriously, and I didn't really understand it, because I always worked at a company where we had enough commercial software that worked. But what it does is it gives. I mean, I would say I learn more on the job in my day job, just because, I work for technical companies that are trying to do something at the edge of ability, and I'm surrounded by people that are working really focused, and that certainly makes me aware of. And I think that we can talk about, well, we could do this or this or this, but we say, let's take something that's safe. We know we can do this, so we'll take a safe move and push it through to completion. And that's what you would expect from a professional. But at the same time, all those things that we choose not to do, some of them are pretty interesting. So if I can take some really kind of clever idea and cast it in something that I can do myself or with a couple of friends to solve some problem that's not a commercial problem, that's just, wouldn't it be neat if this worked? And that's the flow of ideas from the professional world to the open world. But in the open world, if I try it and it works, and I say, oh, well, the key is you do this little thing and then it will work, then it stops being daring, and it's just, oh yeah, well, I've seen this work. I know we can do it. That I've seen it work is it gives you a tremendous amount of confidence. And so that's what really, gosh, now what you'd like to do is you'd like to have, Thursday and Friday for just, you set the commercial work aside and just do cool things. And people have thought that's a good idea. And then, I don't know, there's this 20% time. And I say, yeah, that means you get Saturday and Sunday to do your own projects. It's not everybody. I don't know that the direction of working on a team pushes you in a direction that is very informative, but you have to be cautious because it's important that things come together in the end. We've actually, the exploration that we did in Smalltalk, when Smalltalk showed up at a company where I worked in a research lab, and before it was widely available, Xerox PARC, where they'd spent 10 years on it, they said, we'll work with a small number of companies that might actually make a display that's powerful enough to do that. And so it was kind of our job to figure out what this thing was. And so that was a time for day after day after day. I was sort of in this explore mode, and I wouldn't have known what to do if I didn't find a colleague who was similarly, interested in that. And in fact, I think he was in a team that was doing artificial intelligence, if we could call it that, this was in 90s. And I was doing, I think we call it programmer productivity. We were looking at programming tools, and so it kind of matched both, but the open-ended exploration got me thinking, if this is, and the reason we were productive is we just had this gift that came to us that was worth exploring. But that was something, and it was in trying to figure out how those ideas fit together that we dug into patterns and started talking more publicly about it, and that conversation connected us with a lot of other people who wanted to do the same thing, and that's where I got a network was formed of people that I could ping and ask questions and make promises to them too. I said, "Oh, I think I could do this. Let me do this for you." And they'd say, "Wow, thanks. That was great."
That network sounds like, that and alone is the pattern that I see with you, is that you sort of work very collaboratively with people. You don't really seem to do a whole lot just kind of on your own, and you're always involving other people. And in fact, I cite you often as sort of an example to maybe younger developers, and I don't talk about sort of like necessarily your programming or ideas. I talk about you as somebody that I work with that everybody likes to work with. Word comes into the company, and in a typical high tech company, you have lots of different personalities. You have lots of colorful people. You have people who are very aggressive and arrogant. You have other people who are maybe just kind of brilliant, but sort of work on their own. But the thing about you is that everybody liked you, or everybody likes being around you. They like working with you. Nobody seems to want to compete with you or anything. So what do you,
first of all, I'm easy to compete. I'm easy to compete with because it doesn't feel like competition. I just say, "Hey, why don't we do this little thing? Oh, I'd love to do that." Well, great. Let's just sit down and try working together and see if something comes of it. And ideas pop up, and it's like they're not in my head and they're not in your head. Ideas are just in the space between us, and whatever was said back and forth, the idea materializes, and it's like, one thing you have to be careful is then you go away and you say, "Well, I had this idea, and it was in the space between you." So you can't assume that you can tie down the originality of the idea. And I accept that. Yeah. I studied electrical engineering, and I liked understanding how electricity worked at a level, but when it came to actually building circuits, I couldn't keep the part numbers and I couldn't actually put 25 parts together and make something. But I had a lot of friends who could. And then one of those parts would be a microprocessor, and they put a microprocessor in there, and they say, "Oh, now what am I going to do with this?" And I say, "Well, why don't I help you, and I'll write some code for that microprocessor. You explain your circuit, and I'll put some code." And they, "Really? Really? That's the thing they were dreading. They were electrical engineers. They weren't computer programmers. And I like that. Oh, okay. Well, I want to wiggle this pin up, or do I want to go down with it? And so just figuring all that out side by side with the oscilloscope and the debug monitor. Oh, let me change this. Okay, now it goes up here. And that back and forth where it was clear division. Oh, you're the electrical engineer, you design the circuit. I'm the computer program, I design the program that runs in your circuit. And that practice that often through school and so forth. So I came out of that with this desire to attach myself to somebody who has something that needs programming, and that I can program it better than they can. So I come with bearing gifts in a sense. We talk a lot about pair programming now,
yeah.
and people say, oh yeah, well, that's mentoring. Well, it's not mentoring, because in mentoring, you're the master and you have the apprentice and you're showing, now we do this. It's more like, you have some skills, I have some skills, we need both of those skills, and let's just back and forth in the electrical engineering, the computer programming, moving back and forth, both bringing something to the table. And then the real energy happens, because you're both supercharged. And a lot of people are concerned about that. They say, well, but only one person's typing. Well, but you're both thinking. Is this a typing problem or is this a thinking problem? If it's a thinking problem, the pairing works great.
Yeah. For those of you who may be joining us late, I'm here, Bill Kayser, and we're here in episode 2 of the Sommelier Series, and I'm talking with Ward Cunningham, the inventor of the Wiki, among other things, one of the originators of extreme programming, and of which, I think that was where the first idea of pairing came from, right? That was kind of when I first heard of it.
Well, that's when we said this is really a certifiable industrial practice that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I did it just because I liked hanging out with electrical engineers, but it was really when we had, first of all, it all changed. Computer programming used to be something that you would think and think and think and draw flow charts and then write excruciatingly complicated code. And if someone even came in and offered you a cup of coffee, it would disrupt your, the register allocations were gone. You couldn't do it. But when we were working where everything is in the screen, and there's a window over here where you did this and a window over there, and you get into this, oh, I see what you're doing. I think we need to do here what we did over here. And oh yeah, over here. What did we do over there? And so much of the short-term memory that you used to have to keep in your head is now on the screen. And then pretty soon you get to we should do more of that. We should make sure everything we're doing is on the screen. Maybe we should make a list of things that we're trying that will test what we're writing. And then pretty soon we're saying, yeah, you ought to have a catalog of tests. And all that sort of emerged out of, how do we keep the conversation going when we're actually putting energy into the project? And that came out of that experience. I like to say it wasn't really so much that we were brilliant. It's just that the computers changed. They had big displays. They were small. You had them devoted to your attention while you were working. This was what we could call this the desktop computing revolution. And it just required, it didn't require, but it supported a different approach to working that is much more interactive. And because I was in a lab where we had that sort of stuff, a few years before most people, we got a few year jump on, how can we get this to work.
That practice of pair programming, I don't know. I assume younger developers, maybe they just sort of take that for granted now. It's just that's one of the everyday tools of programming. But I mean, I remember when that idea emerged, back in, I don't know, late, just before 2000 or sometime in that period. And it was just such a radical idea. And I'm fascinated by ideas people have about, hey, here's a new way of doing something that actually stick. There's a lot of fads, a lot of things people try, and they kind of come and go, and particularly terminology, a term will come and then, maybe it's successful, but then the term gets tired and people come up with a new name. But, it's like some of these things just really stuck, design patterns, that stuck, pair programming, that stuck, and it's evolved. Of course, it's
yeah. And what happens is, if it's a part of a bigger system, but it's a part you can kind of get your head around, you can try it and kind of get a feeling for how it works. And then maybe without the rest of those parts of the system, it doesn't actually work that well, but at least you've tried it. And then, in your next project, you try other things. And then there'll come a time where it all just clicks. And you say, wow, that was a great project. And then you start rereading some of these books, and they say, oh yeah, here's what it's like to be in a great project. And you say, man, I don't want to work on any projects except great projects. After that, you become a devotee. Unfortunately, I have people call me up and they say, well, I have a new job, and they don't understand all this, and they want to do these crazy, stupid old things. What do I do? Can you find me another job, Ward? Please find me another job. And I'm saying, well, great projects are kind of a social thing. And if you have some technique, you just have to share it until people find something that works. And there's a lot of stuff that is not like programming a desktop computer, where the cost of error is the loss of life, and you got to just sit there and think it through and whatever. And so what we've done is actually added more tools to the toolbox, not replaced things where deep thinking has worked before. And so there's a certain defensiveness that some people have. They say, well, I don't like the pair program. I don't have any strength in pair programming. I'm always slowed down when I pair program.
Yeah.
And I can't say you're wrong.
Yeah.
But, it certainly, what it does for me is allows me to skip through technologies. I think I'm talking about somebody who is very good at what they do. And as long as the problem is what they do, they can do it. But they're the people who get really attached to what they do because the cost of change, to attack something new, to try something new, is just overwhelming. They become a beginner again, and they don't want to be a beginner. They're used to being an expert.
Well, it's scary because you learn something new, you have to put in this major investment, and you're worried, what if this is just another fad? Or what if I'm, it's like, what's a recent example? I remember when sort of like the JavaScript,
like the latest JavaScript framework,
right?
A big example. It's like one after another.
And, oh my God! I remember it was like Angular. Everybody's got to do
Angular.
And there was another one before that. I can't even remember. Well, jQuery, right?
I've got a lot of
people
time
committed themselves to these, and and there's still some of those projects floating around. That's tough, but no, I'm fascinated. I remember, like, do you remember for much of, I don't know. Much of the effort of sort of discussing software projects was around your source management system, your source code control system. And for a long time, that was always a big debate. That was always a feature. It was like, what editor do you use? What IDE do you use? What source code manager to use? Was it Subversion or CVS or, any of these others?
And then I felt like versus tabs.
Right, yeah. I mean,
it is not gone away.
But some of those questions every now and then, I think they do get settled. And I felt like when Git came along, Git kind of ended those discussions, those
Git,
arguments.
is a nice bit of technology, and you can look at, there were systems that had that same niceness, but to have it in open source software and done well and a community supporting it, and it's like, whoa, is this thing complicated? And I'll tell you, a common experience I had my first year with Git would be, oh, I did something wrong and now nothing works. And I had to go, fortunately, we were using it at work. So I had people around me, oh my God, what do I do when this happens? And that's when you have to really understand, what did you have? What did you do to it? What are the commands? And of course, it's fully developed, but it's a perfect example of something that brings a lot to the table, but you have to have, I think they call it a workflow. You have to have a workflow of how you're going to ask it to do things, and it lets you work a lot of different ways. But what we've all done is we've learned those various workflows. So I can sit down with you and I say, well, are we just going to merge to master? Are we going to do PRs? How are we going to do? Oh, okay. Well, all right. That is a workflow that makes sense for this project today. And how do you get to know those different workflows? Well, you just live them. And you can read a lot of blog posts. It's easy. You search for something and either you find the answer on Stack Overflow or you find somebody who's discussing the pros and cons of various answers, and you read it and you say, oh my gosh. But then all of a sudden you have your source code back and you say, I got to write that down, how that worked. And whereas I think in the older systems, when things went wrong, no, your source code is gone. Sorry, so you get pretty attached to saving it. But that's it's interesting. You can get together among programmers and you can talk to them about what tooling they put around their Git.
Yeah.
And if, oh, you're one of those, you're the graphical user interface guy,
Do you think people's programming, their setup, their configure, their set of tools, do you think that's gotten a lot more complicated over time than it used to be? I mean, if it used to be just sort of a text editor and a compiler, now what is it? I mean, you've got all kinds of things that form somebody's sort of ecosystem of tools.
I think that the life cycle of what it means to be doing a programming activity has just gotten wider and wider, that you're involved earlier and you hang around longer. It used to be, oh, okay, we know what we want the program to do. Let's just sit down and write it. Boom, 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 in one language. Just remember the one language. It's a language that even, and when it's done, it's done. And that, we don't see much of that anymore, because I think the economic incentives for doing things are such that you want to probe the space early. So you write some programs to learn what you ought to do. And then and part of that, things like Git and our choice in languages and the computer technology we can deploy on, and all those things just make it a richer place to work. But it's hard to be very good at everything. You simply can't be very good at everything. So that's why you want to be in an environment where you're working with peers that are similarly interested in achieving, I'll call it excellence. I'm just thinking something that works at the end. That's what we call excellent. The bug list is down to single digits. But the also that are still excited to learn things new. That I think is what keeps you going. There's also we're talking about becoming really expert at something. When you're really expert, you're in a vulnerable position. So to be practiced at becoming expert is a much better strength than just being an expert. That if you could say, oh, I know how to get into this, I know how to get into that. Oh, we're going to want to use this. Okay. First, I want to get the tutorial, and then I want to work through some projects on my own. Then I want to this, and you have a process that you do to become proficient. And if I probably every couple of months I'm diving into something new that takes a non-trivial amount of time to learn, and so that's
How deep do you go? How do you know when you've sort of gone deep enough into something new to just sort of,
I would say if I can write a one-page program that uses whatever I'm trying to learn to advantage, even if it's a fake problem, that then I can always go back and look at that program and it'll all come back to me, because it's the way I prefer spaces. So it'll be whatever it is about how I like to write things, how I name variables and so forth. It makes it mine instead of somebody else's. And so there's lots of clues that it's me talking to the future me. And that, I can let it rest. If I get that going, I say, okay, I've done a little bit of that. And then, the other thing I notice is if I've gotten that far, a one-page program working in some technology, then I can, follow somebody who's really pioneering that work on Twitter. And they'll tweet out something and they'll say, oh, yeah, I know what he's talking about there. I know what she says when she says that, of course.
Yeah.
And that just fills the back of my brain. It's not like I have to go study it, and I'm not working on that. I'm just aware of that. So you rake in and stuff, and it's harder and harder. It used to be I followed people, and that's all I got out of Twitter is great idea after great idea. Now it just seems to be a lot of advertisements for television channels that I'm not going to watch, I say, well, if there's a big animated thing, that means zip past that as fast as you can, because that's not anything you're looking for. But this is well, no, we can argue about monetization here.
Well,
things have got to be monetized, otherwise you wouldn't have that day job. And I've already told you that it's good to have one foot in a day job. So we could start talking about the social responsibility of developers and
what do you think? Do you feel like you have an obligation for social responsibility? Does that inform the decisions you make about what projects to pursue?
I wish it did more, honestly.
Yeah.
I do have, I like to say, what a shame that so many developers spend their career making computers do less. And of course, I'm talking about DRM or something like that,
Yeah.
Let's just make sure you can't do this. Or, gosh, you go to any website, and, then some neat, first of all, the text kind of fades out in a way that I'd kind of like to know how they do that. And then this paywall, drifts up, and then something blinks, and somehow they lock up my computer. And I say, I wish I knew how they do that. Somebody worked very hard preventing me from reading that article. And why we work so hard. I'd rather work really hard at making the computer do more things, because we can get ahead that way. But,
right.
That's because, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think there's actually any reason for it, but somehow the way we've jiggered the economy, that's what computers are number one. I can't even say that. There are so many wonderful things. All right, if I want to talk about a wonderful thing, my favorite wonderful thing is the gravity wave detectors, and they were detecting motions. This is, you just have some big interferometer out in Eastern Oregon, and one in Southeast, and one in Europe somewhere, and they're just waiting to feel the universe jiggle, and they're they're extremely sensitive, just phenomenally sensitive. I as an engineer, I said I didn't think it was possible to make something that sensitive. And even then, they put fake data in there just so the data analysts don't get too excited when they think they've heard, black holes collide or something like that. And then they finally do it and they said, oh, okay, now that we think we have one, we have to do 3 months worth of data analysis to make sure they aren't, it's a real one. And that was how much they had to prepare to build those. And now they get there is another one, just like last week. It's amazing the science that is opened up because they could build an instrument that was that sensitive and build the digital signal processing around it. And, gosh, if I'd have to go get a couple more PhDs or something. I wish I could work on something like that. That's the work I really admire. And I think that it's a lot of people who have done the PhD and learned some science and also had engineering skills and computer programming skills. And it's just to be admired. And who would have known that would be a completely different way that we can observe the universe. So yeah, that's not working on what are those things called? Paywalls. Working on paywall. This is
back to reality.
Yeah. Back to reality.
Don't we all wish we could clone ourselves though and imagine ourselves in some different, completely different industry or setting? While we're talking here, Ward, we've got people. Actually, we're kind of at the west end of the time zones. It's morning for you and me, but for a lot of people watching this and the rest of the U.S. and across the continent and into Europe and Asia, we've got people literally all over the world. We've got some questions coming in.
Oh,
so let's see.
Good questions, I hope.
Well, let's see. Okay, here's one. This is for you. With how the world has changed in recent months, how, in your mind, has this affected social aspect of technology, curiosity, and knowledge acquisition? It hampers some aspects of learning and may boost others. And I'm going to put myself on mute and quiet that phone while you're thinking about that question.
Okay, well, that is an excellent question. And it's because it's something that we've all lived through. And so there's a lot of, 10 years from now, we'll be talking to people, how did you spend your pandemic years? And the one thing is that we've all learned a lot more about video conferencing. That's for sure. And I think that, I worked with a company where we had a big lunchroom and you could just go have lunch and expect to learn something interesting over lunch that you didn't need to know, but now you know it, and that's a wonderful environment. So, you need to find something like that. And, I think that nobody wants to be on another video call unless they have to. So if there's some open source project where they do meet regularly or something like, I think you have to have some kind of unstructured, by unstructured, I mean, no specific agenda, where if you get through the agenda, you can get off the call, because we're all pretty tired of the calls. But I think that is part of a way of life. And if there's anything good that comes out of it, I think the call software will get better and better. I will say that I attended the Wikimania conference, which was supposed to be in Bangkok, but it was online instead. And they had set up some software and ran the software with enough skills that it was a very pleasant place to be, and had enough of a, I'm at table T6. Who's here with me? Oh, I can talk. Oh, gee, if you turn on your camera, I can even see you. And running into old friends and making new friends. I couldn't believe that it was so easy, but that's part of the culture that keeps Wikipedia going. And of course, I have the advantage of having some history. Oh my gosh, I'm talking to Ward Cunningham. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just a person. What do you do? and it's just, that was delightful. So I think as more things, because as far as I can tell, we've got at least another year ahead of this pandemic thing, and so it's worth finding out about these things, and stuff that where you can kind of participate. I don't know. I'll tell you that I got through the first year of the pandemic by just riding my commuter bike just around my neighborhood, and just looking around my neighborhood to see what is at the end of that dead end street. And I would get lost out there, and I'd take a picture because I knew I'd have a geo coordinate. So, oh yeah, that little creek that was at the end of that dead end street was this creek, and I see that same creek 6 blocks down. And that was my discovery, and I started collecting all those pictures, and just knowing my neighborhood. If I can't go very far, well, I won't go very far. There's stuff close to me that's interesting.
Yeah, I think you showed me kind of what that turned into. Is that part of your treasure map?
I actually started feeding them together. Just
right.
Oh God, well, what very, very quickly happens is I have more pictures than I can remember. So I have to write some software, and I'll scroll through my pictures. I get, I can just look. Oh yeah, I can remember that. What was that place? Oh, that was that place where the bicycle fell over, or whatever, and I just go look through it every couple of weeks.
Yeah. So there you go.
And what I'm doing is basically programming my brain to think that this pandemic was an opportunity, and it was an opportunity. It helps to have a nice bike, and
a nice neighborhood. I've seen your neighborhood.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. And in Portland, there's a river down the middle of it, and the east side is flat because it was meander over geologic time, and it's bumping up against the hills on the west side. And I live on the west side, where bikes are less popular because you go up and down hills.
Right.
But I got strong enough to go up and down hills, and when I lost that, I got an electric motor. So I motor up and down hills, and that means there's a lot of dead end streets on this side of town because there's a lot of creeks in those hills, and they just stop the street. So if so this, I'll call it geography awareness from my neighborhood that I had. I like my neighborhood, but I was on my way downtown because I like downtown too, and so that's less so. But what is that? That's saying I'm a computer programmer and I want to play with my computers, and I got some nice graphics, and what kind of when I got more pictures than I could keep track of, I say, well, I have to invent some way to keep track of my more pictures, and there's a lot of one-page programming projects there. And I looked at it and I said, I could do another year of this. I just look, I have to write a little farther to get to, my radius is 4 miles or something now.
Yeah. But that's interesting. I mean, that's people are seeing the process of invention for you, even in that story, and kind of that's sort of in the upstream phase, clearly. So maybe we'll see more from that, but it is interesting how you can find things that aren't necessarily even in technology to explore and find opportunity. And I became much more interested in what water does and what people do to water, because basically we built the city on top of these creeks, which means they're all running through culverts, and this one,
So if I'm out in suburbia, the creeks are exposed. But when you get into downtown Beaverton, not like Beaverton is a giant place, but they built Beaverton over all the creeks. And yeah, it's a mystery. It's some people are studying these collisions of black holes, and I'm studying the sculpting of the ground by creeks.
So we got a few minutes left. Let's see if we can get in at least one more question. Here's one. It says, so far he has described some great patterns for having an inventor's mindset or how to collaborate well with others. Amazing insights. Looking at how the world is today and where it is going, what is perhaps the most damaging anti-pattern to watch out for that can prevent individuals from getting things done, inventing things? So there's a challenge. What do you think? Anti-pattern. And by the way, what do you think of that term, anti-pattern?
I was against it. I was against it in the beginning, but it's taken hold and it's used consistently. So I know exactly what the questioner is getting at, and I would say that gosh, I don't think in these terms very often. And
in terms of like negative.
And I think it's a mindset thing. I had a boss once that says, of your colleagues, who would you most like to work with? And some startup. And I said, I could name this for the. And the next question a week later was, who would you least like to work with? And I'd say, I can't. First of all, I don't allow myself to think that way. If there's somebody I'm working with, I think they've got something that I'd like to know. I just don't know what it is yet, so I just never think, I just put that out of my mind. But in terms of things that I could pick on, I'm going to say anything that causes you to turn off your creative instincts. Something that I think one thing would be in a meeting, when you float an idea and somebody says, don't think like that. We haven't got time to do that. You're kissing on, if somebody dumps on you for even trying something creative. Of course, I think we started this conversation talking about the reality of having a deadline and the creativity required to keep a lot of latitude and, to be creative while you're working against a deadline. But when somebody says, no, the deadline prevents us from thinking, we just have to execute this plan and somebody's going to say, well, yeah, but you have to do that sometimes. And I don't doubt that, but it is not the sweet spot in computer programming because the computers are just, there's too much opportunity out there to spend too much time like that. So curiosity, creativity, those are things that I think are natural, and we allow that to get shut off. So the message is to, now whether you blurt it out in a meeting, when it's half thought out, or put together a little prototype in the evening, whatever it is, just keep that going in your life, because it doesn't go away. That's the good news.
We need that creativity in meetings. Is one thing that I really think is a big dysfunction among teams, is when somebody steps up and asserts themselves in a negative way to say, this could never work. This is the wrong way to do it. If you're doing it like X, you're doing it wrong. Or, they assert themselves in such a way that it's an absolute, and it's a position that they can't come back from. It's hard to admit you're wrong. It's hard to admit, say, well, I was wrong about that. But it's even harder, when you just throw down this gauntlet of superior knowledge and authority by saying, this is the wrong solution. And then it kills it. It kills any discussion, because if we're ever going to get to a solution that might have that, we're going to have to go through all of this compromise and energy to try to, dial you back.
There's another one that's kind of related to that, and I think it is when you have an honest fear about something, and you try to express that fear. I'm concerned that we'll run into problems over here, and somebody dismisses that by saying, "Oh, I know you're good enough. You'll be able to work through that." And it's basically discounting your fear. That goes away after you've succeeded 3 or 4 times in your life, and you have the cred that when you say, "I'm worried," everybody gets worried. So that, the gray beard helps there. So let me tell you, this is a bigger project than you think it is. And if you're your first few years of programming, you're not allowed to say that, because your judgment isn't judged high enough. But get some projects completed, and then you'll have a basis for that.
Right. Well, on that note, I see we've hit just past 8 o'clock. I think we need to wrap it up. It's awkward because usually our conversations go on for a couple of hours. This feels rather short.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for participating in this. It was very generous of you to offer your time to share with other people. And it's always a pleasure talking to you. One of the most gratifying things I find in life is to just sit down and have a conversation with someone where you talk about things you care at, and you walk away being maybe a little bit smarter at the end of it. And I feel like maybe that's what we've had here today.
Add some to your long list of to-dos. I got to get into that sometime. 3D graphics.
I got a couple of notes here. I got to go. I got some work to do now. But thanks again, Ward, and thanks for everybody for joining us here in the second episode of the Sommelier Series. I hope you follow Nagarro on LinkedIn for upcoming episodes, because I think they've got some really interesting ones planned for the future, and we hope to see you there. Thanks, Ward.
All right. Thank you, Bill.